Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Authors in Conversation panel featuring the four 2021 Minnesota Book Awards finalists in the competitive poetry category. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in the organization's capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's book awards are sponsored by Education Minnesota in the poetry category through the generosity of Wellington Management Incorporated. My name is Su Hwang, and I'm a Minneapolis-based poet. My debut collection, Bodega, published by Milkweed Editions, was awarded the 2020 Minnesota Book Award in Poetry, and it's my great honor to be this year's moderator. Before getting started, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Dakota people, indigenous keepers of the land on which many of us on this panel are zooming in from today. This land was reserved for the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe people are the original stewards of the story in this place now called Minnesota. The Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, organizers of the Minnesota Book Awards, honor this tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work to lift up storytellers in our state. For this latest installment of the Minnesota Book Awards popular Meet the Finalists series, I'm delighted and honored to be joined by four brilliant poets. Roy G. Guzmán, author of Catrachos, published by Graywolf Press. Ray Gonzalez, author of Feel Puma, published by University of New Mexico Press. Danez Smith, author of Homie, published by Graywolf Press. And Torrin A. Greathouse, author of Wound from the Mouth of a Wound, published by Milkweed Editions. Congratulations to each of you for the Minnesota Book Award finalist nod. Woohoo! Now, in the interest of making the most of our short time together, I'm going to begin with a general question that I'd like each of you to respond to in turn. I'll then have a question specific to each of you and your finalist book. This past year has been marked by unimaginable loss, upheaval, uncertainty, and a long overdue reckoning against white supremacy and wanton police violence. Here in the Twin Cities, Derek Chauvin's trial is underway for the murder of George Floyd. The pandemic, which has claimed over 500,000 American lives, disproportionately affecting people of color, is still ongoing. And just 2 days ago, there was yet another mass shooting, this time in Atlanta, with hate crimes and xenophobia on the rise. And as authors, it's been an especially challenging year to launch books while having to adapt solely to the digital realm. During a time of such pain, grief, and transformation, how have you taken care of yourself as an artist? Can you speak to some of the ways in which you've tried to cultivate joy, connection, passion, and/or a new craft or study? And how have they, if at all, affected your writing practice, aesthetic, or process? So we'll start with Roy.
Thank you so much, Sue, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm more than honored to be, in the presence of these amazing poets, teachers, you name it. It's a lot. We've been having to deal with a lot this past year. And for me, I think about, you started off talking about death and grief. And what's interesting for me is just like the way in which it's a transnational thing, right? Like the question of death and grief and how, we look at white supremacy here in the US and it carries ripples all around the world. And so in thinking about who gets to live, who gets to die, this is something that I've had to deal with a lot. And so, naturally I've been depressed a lot. I've been sleeping a lot. I've been dreaming a lot, however, so it's not been this sort of restful sleep. And at the same time, I've been eating a lot. And with eating a lot, it's been one thing eating has allowed me to just be with my partner and share in something, even though it might be detrimental for us. I mean, now we're in the process of, trying to lose that weight, but it's been a lot. And so, yeah, I think about, I never thought I would get this, but even doing meditation, for instance, like I've been doing more of that, and I ended up buying recently a singing bowl. And the singing bowl is it's the most beautiful, one of the most beautiful, like not just sound, but just sounds that you can produce through that. And it feels bodily. It feels like it's like activating my senses to do different things. And it's been great to do that, to be a part of this wonderful instrument. And I've also been listening to more vinyl records. Vinyl has been so good at even just like accessing records that I'd never heard of, I never would have heard of. You find for $2 at the store, and then yeah, you play it. So I think for me, that's like trying to take care of myself has like involved a lot of something, a lot of different things. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Thanks, Roy. And I also have a singing bowl, and it's amazing. Yeah, thank you. And Ray?
Hello, hello. Thanks, Sue, for having us here, and hello to everybody. And it's good to meet Danez. We haven't met before. Thanks again. Thanks again to the Friends of the St. Paul Library. When all this started about a year ago, I thought, well, here comes forced, not isolation, but solitude. I've never felt I've been isolated as a writer, but solitude. I thought, well, I've been there before, but here it goes again in the middle of a semester last year. But this forced solitude became, I don't know, maybe not passive, but became more gentle than I thought it ever would. And for several reasons, I went back and I started reading a lot of books by older poets, older books that I had not read in a long time, because I'm always teaching newer books, newer writers. So that really helped. But the other thing that really opened my eyes, I had 3 or 4 good friends around the country, and we always email and send poems and so forth. Well, I don't even remember whose idea was it, but among us, we started calling each other on the phone, which was almost new because we were, we didn't even try Zoom a couple of times. We started calling, and I think at one point somebody said, "Oh, let's send some old-fashioned letters through the mail," which we haven't done yet. But as soon as we started calling each other, things really changed, and it really helped. We were talking on the phone, and yes, we email a lot and send manuscripts, but we were talking on the phone, hear each other's voices and worries and concerns. So that helped a lot, maybe more than anything else. Also being in touch, of course, with family, since they're in El Paso. And El Paso was in the news even before the pandemic, of course, with all the problems on the border. So that wasn't anything new, but since the pandemic was so bad down in El Paso, I kept in touch with a lot of them. And then again, here in Minnesota, just go back and to that solitude that isn't forced, but it's made me write a lot of poems, probably more than I have written any other year in my life. So it's been quite a ride.
Thank you so much, Ray. I wish I could say I was writing a lot of poems, but I think we've had a different experience this past year, but thank you so much for your insights. So Danez, how have you taken care?
For sure. Thank you, Sue, for the question. Also, late congratulations. I hope you and whoever wins out of us 4 gets get their proper in-person celebration. sometime after this. And I'm also really like, just, I gotta say, pleased to be nominated with you three poets, two peers and one really storied, legendary Minnesota poet, Ray. We've never met, but it's an honor to meet you here. Yeah, this is just like such a, I've like secretly, I think in part of my like career, like wants that are like selfish, I've always wanted to be a finalist for the Minnesota Book Award more than anything, because I love being from here. So I'm glad I finally made it, took 3 books. And I can't think of a better group to like be able to celebrate this with, even if we all will be at the award ceremonies in our living rooms. But to your question, which sparked so much for me, so I'll try to keep it a little short. I think for me, right, I think so many folks have hit the nail on the head, and I want to knock on like, you know, going towards new arts. Roy, sorry, not Roy, the Roy and the Ray. Roy said singing bowl. I tried singing for the first part of the pandemic. That didn't really work out. I took on roller skating, which I kept with, and that has actually been really nice. I found last year to be really difficult in terms of producing work that was not either commissioned or very purposeful. I couldn't necessarily like just find my way into a poem, but I felt like roller skating was a really nice thing to feel like I was channeling my art some way. Like I was still being creative, learning how to move my body in a different way. So I was really appreciative to that because it kept me feeling like I was making. But the art I did make, like I said, moved with more intention. It was people who reached out for commission, and the question sort of sparked something in me. And I feel like I really relied on editors for that spark or that invitation last year. Or like around the murder of George Floyd, I did find myself making things, writing things in order to channel some of that energy and make this artistic component of who I am useful in some type of way. But I think amongst all the anger and justice, right, I don't think a lot of the times, even right now, right, when sort of plotting with friends and text messages and stuff like that about like, you know, is there something between Black and Asian folks that we need to do a little bit louder, stronger? Art isn't always, I guess, my first answer for what to do with that sort of energy, but I'm grateful for where it's there. Yeah, and then, you know, I think the thing that has kept me writing, this year I've been writing a lot, thank God for 2021 in that little way. But it was, I started to think, what was the difference between writing and practice? And so the thing that actually got me jogging is I've been keeping a high bun journal every day. I say that I'm about 4 days behind, but my plan is to catch up. But I've been keeping a high bun journal, doing the haiku in the morning and the prose poem in the evening. And that having that like low stakes place to like write, I flipped a page and never look back. I actually had to write a little apology to the book because I read some poems to some students just to like show drafts. And it that's where I kind of stopped. And I was like, oh, I think that messed up my mojo. I wasn't supposed to read these poems out loud to anyone, I think, yet. But it's been really nice. And that was even my first time flipping through and being like, oh shit, I wrote that on January 23rd. Cool. So having that low stakes method that's really fun and interesting has kept the rest of my creative juices flowing. And so at the end of the day, I go to sleep, and if I did nothing else, I wrote a poem. But it's been nice to have those ideas back. And I feel like maybe last year, between figuring out work, figuring out how, you know, all the moving and mutual labor we're doing in Minneapolis, I think my creativity belonged elsewhere. And I think that's a great answer for anybody, right, who is struggling. You can be you know, if your creativity needs to go towards the rent or towards mental health, then go work, you know, and the writing will be there. And I'm glad, like, I think this year was a testament of that for me. The writing will be there.
Thank you so much, Danez. There's a lot of wisdom there. And I love that you know, just having that daily practice, low stakes, you know what I mean? And you're right, like your energies, we had to focus on many different things this past year. I remember reading your amazing piece in the New Yorker after George Floyd was murdered. And just, you know, there's just a lot going on. So thank you so much, Danez. And then Torrin, how about you?
Well, first off, I'm just so happy to be here with all of you. I can't imagine a better group of finalists to be here with, and I'm so grateful to be a finalist this year with my debut collection. I couldn't have possibly imagined it, and it's such a blessing. It has honestly been really hard to find joy in this last year. It has been a year of grief after grief after grief, on top of all of the things that have been mentioned. Right now, the GOP is pushing at least 78 different pieces of anti-trans legislation against trans kids and adults. Trans healthcare protections have still not been reinstated from when they were rolled back in the last presidency. Some studies have found that as many as 2 times as many disabled people have died from COVID-19 as able-bodied people. And still there's nothing being done really to protect disabled people, to get disabled people vaccinated who are under 65. And so I see this every day, and it's this repetition of the ways in which my life and the lives of my communities are disposable. At the same time, I think in some ways, in an incredibly painful way, this has been very freeing for my writing, because it made me realize there is an urge sometimes, I think, to write up only to a certain line, because there will be people who say, if you say a certain thing, if you go too far, people who are gatekeepers, people who hold power, you know, this will hurt your community if you speak in certain ways. But at the end of the day, there's nothing I can say that will make people care more about trans people. There's also nothing I can say that will make people care less about us. I don't have the power to do that. Because at the end of the day, there's still going to be so many people that want people like me dead. And so being able to come to the page and say, I'm going to write what I need to write, because I can't have those stakes there anymore, because I can't change that. That's been the last year for me, is realizing that the last decades and decades of the trans canon, the disabled canon, you know, hasn't changed anything about the stakes for us if we were able to lose so much in 4 years, in a year.
Thank you, Torrin. I do want to add, though, I mean, I know, I just want to say that for someone to pick up your book, even though you may think that it doesn't make a difference, I think you're going to change many lives just by writing your story. And just grateful to have all of your voices in the world, because when I spent time with all of your collections, the one thing that kept popping into my head was just innovation. And I think all of you are pushing the boundaries of language and story, and like personal, intimate storytelling to new levels. And I was really just grateful to have time with your work. And I think it's going to have a lasting impact on many readers for many, many years to come. So I just wanted to thank you for your work, and for all of you for being here. And those were just amazing answers. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. Now I'm going to move over to a specific question regarding each of your books, if that's okay. So we'll start with Roy again. So Roy, your poems in Catrachos are a constellation of intricate nesting dolls, encapsulating a story within a story within a story. There's so much richness and range. One of the unifying threads in the collection is the incredible Queerdactyl series, 13 poems titled Queerdactyl, to be exact. Can you tell us what inspired this series, the process in which these poems were written, then ordered in the manuscript, and how they serve to fuse the many thematic concerns in your book.
Yeah, so thank you so much for this question too, and I just want to acknowledge like the amazing things that my peers have just said. Um, I so one thing that I sort of contend with this in one of the poems, the Alapata Branch Library. When I came to the U.S. I didn't start school right away. I was undocumented and I needed like a legal guardian to go to school. Things have changed since then, but at the time, it was very different. And so I would find myself looking up like just books with dinosaurs, basically. I was obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid, and when I could get a hold of a library card, I think at the time, um, the max number of books that you could check out was like 50, and I would go through like the science section and just take all of these books with me of dinosaurs, and I was just fascinated by the names, even though I didn't know, like, I didn't speak English. The names just sounded so rich, and many of them derive from Latin, so in some way Spanish also shares some of these names, and um, yeah, I've been fascinated with dinosaurs for a while, and this happened in 2000, I think 2015. I was with an ex of mine at Victor's Cafe here in Minneapolis, and we were just playing with different names of dinosaurs. And I remember that he said the word pteroqueer, and tarot queer sounded like a tarot deck. And I was like, oh, I don't know that I want to play with that just yet. I have like, my grandmother was my great grandmother was a tarot reader. And then I subverted that to like queeradactyl. And we were just laughing, driving on our way back to the apartment. And something about this word, as I kept driving, just started, the sounds of the word started to trigger memories of when I was a child growing up in Miami. And, when I would run away from home and I would go to the club, when I was like 14, 15, and, like the voguing scene, the drag ball scene that I was exposed to, and all of these different like voices, all of these memories sort of started like flooding back. And I got home and I started writing one of the queeradactyl poems. And I remember being done with it. And I felt like when I wrote it, I was like, I've never done like anything like this before. And I finished writing it and I kept thinking about how this voice, this world that I had just created in my head, how it needed more space. And so more situations came up. After a while, I realized that there wasn't just one queeradactyl, there were many queeradactyls. And so the way that it operates, I'm a very visual person. And the way that I think about the queeradactyls in the book is I think of two movies in particular. One is Pan's Labyrinth, and the other one is Beasts of the Southern Wild. And I think about like, how does the child find ways to survive, right, in an adult world of so much violence? In Pan's Labyrinth, right, we have the backdrop of this, of Franco, the violence of Franco, and in Beasts of the Southern Wild, we have Katrina, right? And so the child is looking for a space to survive. And I think of the queeradactyl poems as almost like what happens when a child has been traumatized and creates a world, and is to which they can escape, to which they can reimagine, things to ways to exit out of the pain, out of the grief. And you know, a lot of the poems deal with, you know, the HIV/AIDS, you know, crisis, which is still a global crisis. It deals with music, pop music, et cetera, et cetera. And because I love music so much, I think of them as also kinds of interludes throughout the book. One, you know, two amazing albums that do that so well, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill and Janet Jackson's work. And for me, I kept thinking, like, what are, when these interludes come up, like, what are they doing within the album, within the book? And for me, it's like ways to, you know, break the fourth wall, ways to be almost like meta, you know, to provide some meta commentary on the other poems. And I wanted them to feel like eruptions, right? Like the life of the BIPOC person is in many ways a life that is always under assault. And so I wanted that to feel like that throughout the book. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Roy. I'm gonna have to go back and reread the Queerdocta poems again, just after hearing your answer. Thank you so much. And I wish we knew each other when you were 14 and we could have gone dancing together. Thanks so much. So Ray, next question is for you. Your significant body of work spanning decades always returns to your place of origin, the geography, and the familial ancestral mythos of the Southwest. Field Puma is no different in this regard, yet this collection feels wholly new, fresh in its concision and prismatic imagery. It also pays homage to the ghosts of many poets, from friends and mentors to idols and historical figures. And poems and the act of writing them take on an archetypal significance. Can you speak to why you chose to have them populate this collection and how you can return to the same place again and again, yet capture such novelty in your work? So basically, what's your secret sauce, Ray?
Well, thank you. It's kind of an unusual time to talk about my home. I've probably been weeping for El Paso since the El Paso massacre 2 years ago in the Kmart parking lot. By coincidence, only 2 blocks from where I gave my last reading in El Paso, maybe the year before. Quite a busy area there. And then, of course, all the children and parents locked up in those cages in downtown. One of my sisters works nearby. She's told me a lot of the things that she's seen there every day going home from work. But to answer your question specifically, the reason I keep going back to that is, to me, when you grow up in an area like the desert Southwest, the landscape of the desert, the mountains, the canyons, the Rio Grande River will never leave your life. And as a poet, you're drawn into it because all my memories and all the collective memories of a lot of the people that I have known down there, my family, my ancestors, it's almost like on a certain level, they're trapped in that landscape, not in a negative sense, but to me, all poetry comes from history, you know, whether it's personal or whether it's cultural, whatever it may be. And every time I go down there, I always go for a hike, you know, in the desert nearby. And some of the area, of course, is all cut up and built up, and other areas stays wild and nobody goes there. So I try to find more of those places. They're harder to find now. So you go farther and farther out. And every time I turn to the canyons and the mountains, I know that there's a story there. There's a poem there. There's silence there. My mentor, Robert Burlingame, who changed my life to poetry a few years ago, what he did, we used to go on many hikes in the Guadalupe Mountains, not far from Carlsbad Caverns in Mexico. And he lived nearby, and the way he left was, one day he went on a hike by himself, and then he dropped dead, and it took his family 4 days to find him. And a friend of mine, we were both students of his in El Paso, he said, "Oh, that's very Bob. That's a very Bob thing to do." you go back to the earth that way. And I say this because, again, every time I go down there, maybe it's connected to writing about past figures like Geronimo, who died maybe 30 miles from where my mother was born, retelling stories about the Southwest to try to remove them from the stereotypes, you know, of the bad Indian and the good conquering Spanish conquistador, whatever it may be. And that's also why I write about ghosts, because in many ways, when you go back there as somebody who was raised there, you're kind of entering that landscape that won't leave you alone. And then at the same time, the whole thing with the border and immigration, I grew up seeing that every single day. But when I was back in the 50s, when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, people were very good and kind to people coming across. They gave them jobs, they fed them, they clothed them, they welcomed them to the US. There was no such word as mojado or illegal, wetback, whatever it may be. Nobody used those terms. Well, 40, 50 years later, I go back and visit, and even some of my family members are very anti-Mexicano, very anti-immigration. Things have changed. But when I was growing up, it was like a welcoming thing to help people come across. And so now that's changed. And yet a part of me, I think, realizes that as it changes, it has really stayed the same. And once again, because of the landscape, the mountains, the canyons, the hiking trails, the cactus, whatever it may be. And as the writer, I need to be there, you know, to write about those things, because again, most of the media attention and most of the public attention is going to be on those kids that are locked up, on the pandemic, on other immigrant issues, on financial issues, all the different things that a border city goes through, the crime, of course. And it's almost like the crowd is right here, and the poet staring at a mountain is standing over here, and here come the poems. And that's why I can never leave that place alone. I'll always go back and keep writing about it. And I guess one final thing, writing about past historic figures, I bring them to life because I think that as a poet, you have that gift of the imagination. So yes, on one level you pretend, but on the other level, you're allowing these past historic figures to speak through you, to speak for you. You speak through them and kind of give a different dimension, you know, to your poems. It isn't just me, in my view. I try to encompass more than that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ray. I definitely felt there was just beautiful hauntings in your book. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Next, we have Danez. My question for Danez. As we've all struggled with isolation, your book, Homie, feels especially prescient in our emphatic need for connection, for love, for laughter, for that unspoken intimacy between two people or within chosen families, despite the many complexities and complications of human relationships. Homie chronicles the profound importance and endless nuances of friendship through odes, anthems, and elegies, exemplifying the personal as political and the political as personal, as you wrestle the many violences of simply existing in our racist society. This is your fourth collection after Insert Boy, Black Movie, and Don't Call Us Dead. How did you approach composing this book to explore these topics? And were there any challenges in writing these poems as you balanced such vulnerability while pushing back against the white gaze?
Yeah, I think for me, and I'm not that old. I only even have 3 books. Black Movie's a chapbook, but I did work really hard on it, so we'll claim it today as a 4th book. Yeah, I think for me, this was actually the one that I felt the least burdened by the white gaze. I think I struggled with that question so much. I think in like the early part of what was like, you know, later in me writing poetry, but like the start of a career in poetry, I had started to really encounter that question and be rocked and troubled by it, and sometimes stalled by it, what to do with that white gaze. And it was something, it was a question I feel like I kind of just had to grow out of. Like, I think I like would go to mentors and, you know, sort of big cousin poets and sort of ask, what do you do with this? And some of them would sit with me very considerate and listen and offer what they thought. And some would just kind of roll their eyes and just be like, one day. And then I think it happened. One day I was just like, the question does not serve my work. So why am I spending so much time on it? Right? Like, I firmly believe that when you release something into the world, you can have all your intentions and your hopes for it, but it does belong to the world at that point, and other people come to it with their baggage and interpretations and lenses and all that kind of stuff. And so if I know white people are going to look at my work, and if I'm like not in the business of like being like, no white people can look at my work, then why am I worried about them looking? But I did want to set conditions for that looking with this collection. That's why Homie is sort of a false title. There's, for those who haven't read it yet, there's a, and not to the folks at home, there's an author note as soon as you open it that says, this book is titled Homie because I didn't want non-Black people to say my nig, and then the real title is my nig, and we sort of go forward. And that was because I wanted to, maybe I was dealing with the white gaze too, but I think I was trying to set the conditions for that gazing, right? I didn't want to recreate, especially in a book that delights in language that can be seen to be reclaimed, like the N-word, the B-word, the F-word as it relates to queer people. I wanted to not do what I saw a lot of like my idols in hip hop do, which was sort of release this language into the land and let anybody own it. Without reclaim, right? And so that's why you have white kid. I punched a white kid at a Kendrick concert one time because I was like, you don't get to say that, and that, those words, right? And I was trying to keep my readers and my white ones and my non-Black ones from being punched because I use the N-word a lot, right? And so how do I? So that was a rare attempt at me saying like, I know you're looking, come on in. But act like literally I'm not thinking about you or talking about you, right? I might be thinking about whiteness, but I'm not trying to attend to the white reader, which is something I think I did do in Don't Call Us Dead. I think I did spend a chunk of that book looking white readers in the eye and actually asking them to like engage with the work a little bit more. So this book for me, I really felt like I got to go off and just really have fun. I felt myself returning to more like my spoken word roots. I think these poems feel sort of spoken wordy for me. I don't know what that means. I think that means a more conversational tone, or that they have a particular kind of anthemic energy. And I think after writing such a hard collection and touring it, I was ready to write something a little bit more joyful. The hard part for me was not the white gaze, but I think the sort of the sheen that joyful work has over it, right? I think it's such a hard thing. I think so many writers, we talk about joy being the most difficult thing to write about. And granted, joy for me, like my friends always joke with me that I don't know how to write a happy poem. Cause like, I'll be like, I wrote the happiest poem ever. And it's just like an elegy or it's just like, and we're all dead, maybe. But those are my happy poems. And so for me, it was so hard because I think I've always tried to have that balance of joy and whatever the opposite of that is, pain, trauma, ecstasy, and whatever. Ecstasy and sorrow, I want to say. I felt myself leaning more on the light side, and that was really hard to trust. I wrote a lot of very cheesy poems, and I think I had to work my way through them to sort of find what felt like the right kind of light, what felt like it had enough difficulty just to get the right amount of cheesiness that I wanted. Because I think writing a book that is extending its heart towards your friends, your family, loved ones, towards your people, I think it should be a little cheesy sometimes. Or I think, that is the land where I guess I wasn't scared of crossing into, or like really embracing, I think, sentimentality, which I think is such a sexist word that we use in academia, right? Because I think it was meant to imply like, do not write like the women, or do not write with the feeling, right? Do not explore yourself in these ways that are vulnerable. I love that. Or like to be right, sentimentality as like an overabundance of like tenderness. That's something I think like somebody like Lucille Clifton does from time to time, and you're not gonna tell me that she's not a master poet, right? And so, so to find that level of what is sort of exuberant within its joy, without crossing too far into commercial or sitcom or something like that, you know, was a challenge. And it took a lot. I'm really thankful to poet Monica Sock, who like looked at, we were at a retreat together and she looked at a couple of poems on my wall that I had hanging up and just made a face. And so I went and wrote a whole bunch of new stuff. But yeah, so that was the biggest challenge for me, was trusting joy and figuring out what that looked like.
Thank you so much, Danez. And that's so insightful, like to trust your own joy, you know what I mean? But reading your book was so powerful. I mean, there was so much energy, electricity, and I think you said exuberance. And that's what I felt. And it was an honor to read it. So thank you so much. And Torrin, in reading your collection, Wound from the Mouth of a Wound, I was struck by your vivid imagery, precision of language, and devastating candor. It felt like the poems were weaving its own mythology, as depicted so powerfully on the book's cover. One hallmark of this collection is your use of inventive stylistic elements and formal play. Burning Haibun uses textual blackouts and haiku. Another example is a sonnet meant to be read in the mirror, which was so cool, by the way. It's hard to single out just one illustrative example, but can you tell us about some of your major inspirations in the formal choices you employed in the book and how they function to deepen the speaker's meditations?
Thank you so much for this question, Sue. Something I actually want to turn to is something that Roy said, because it struck such a chord with kind of exactly what I thought about when you first emailed us these questions before we met. And that was the idea of world making. You know, often form is taught as kind of a container, a way of holding a poem. And I think likewise, myth can be a kind of container. But I like more so to think of these things as worlds. And the act of creating a form or a set of formal constraints for a poem as the act of world making. Particularly when you're creating your own form, you get to make a world. And when you're making a world, you set the conditions of that world. The formal constraints of the poem are that poem's physics. And so for a poem like The Burning Haibun, I knew that I wanted to get at a lot of the things that I see Great Haibun getting at, because it's a form I love so deeply. But I knew I wanted to change the frame a little bit. Haibun often kind of deal with an exterior landscape. And for me, I wanted to see how I could make these poems turn inward, what it would look like for the poem to concern itself with the interior landscape, whether that was memory, whether it's, you know, an emotion, whatever that interior landscape is. And that's when I started to think about the various ways in which the interior landscape is textured. And at the time I was kind of thinking through these ideas, I was reading Su Hwang's Night Sky with Exit Wounds. And the two poems in this collection that really informed this particular form are Immigrant Haibun and also Obad with Burning City, which performs this kind of tearing apart and erasure of the lyrics to White Christmas throughout the poem. And it clicked with me, what if I combined erasure with the Haibun to get at the fragmentation of memory that occurs in situations of alcoholic blackout, of traumatic memory and repression. And then how can you use a form to then create a world of interior space that is fragmented? So I love that Roy brought the idea of world making into this space, because that's so fundamental to my poetics, especially when form is involved.
Wow, thank you so much, Torrin. And you're right, your poems are like galaxies, worlds that you're building. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our finalists. This was an amazing conversation. It was just great to see everyone in their squares. I know we can't be together, but it was great to share some virtual space. And congratulations again. Wow, just a tremendous group of finalists. And so thank you to everyone who are watching at a later date and for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Awards Steward Organization, the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. You can find out more about future programs on their website, thefriends.org. In particular, mark your calendars for Thursday, April 29th. That's the evening that the winner in this literary category and 8 others are finally revealed. It will be entirely online. Attendance is free, but registration is required. Visit thefriends.org/MNBA to reserve your spot. Congratulations again to everyone. Thank you again for joining us this Thursday afternoon. And I'm gonna just sit with a lot of what you were saying today. I've just been really inspired. And so thank you so much. Please take good care of yourselves and each other. And hopefully we can all meet someday soon and hug it out. So thank you so much.